Analyze Asia is brought to you by SFL. Do you manage your own IT for distributed teams across Asia Pacific? Then you know how painful that can be. SFL helps your in-house team by taking cumbersome tasks off their hands and giving them the tools to manage IT effectively. Get help across Asia Pacific, from onboarding, procuring devices, to real-time IT support and offboarding. With our state-of-the-art platform, gain full control of all your IT infrastructure in one place. Our team of IT support pros are keen to help you grow. Check out esevel.com and get a demo today. Use our referral code ASIA for 10% off. Terms and conditions apply.
I'm actually not a believer of the Web2 turning Web3 thing. So these days, a lot of companies basically turning a non-profitable Web2 companies and adding a token element into that and turning into a Web3 companies, and think issuing a token can flip the whole picture differently. I'm not a believer of that. The reason is that the user coming on board with a different purpose. These people from the Web2, they don't care about whether they have token, they don't care about whether they're owning the assets.
Welcome to Analyze Asia, the premier podcast dedicated to dissect the pulse of business, technology, and media in Asia. I'm Bernard Leong, and we all agree that the crypto market is on a downturn, but it's also a great time to build and invest at the same time. With me today, Jessica Liu, partner at AppWorks Ventures, and we're going to dive deep into how AppWorks are investing into the Web3 space. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yes, and we recently met in Singapore and have a cup of coffee and discuss a lot about some of the deals that we're all working on. But I think this is your first time on the show, and we really want to get your origin story first. How did you start your career?
I started my career, it's actually not in the sort of startup industry. I actually joined a corporate, it was called Standard Chartered Bank. So I was studying in the States, and when I graduated, it was basically during the financial crisis. So instead of staying in the States, I decided to move back to Taiwan and join the big corporate with a big consumer banking system.
And then from that consumer banking, how did you ended up a career into venture capital?
I think, that's an interesting journey. So back then, well, these days, it probably sounds very easy things or people are already familiar with. But back then, we are putting a lot of efforts on studying online banking, digital banking stuff. And it really opened my eyes at the whole internet industry difference from the traditional industry. And I think the most amazing part is that the data you can collect from the whole internet journey is a lot of better than the traditional financial data you can collect. I think that sort of inspired me, and I pivoted myself from financial bankers to more startup toward facing role.
And you joined AppWorks originally just to look at fintech, type of companies. I guess crypto at that point in time was still at its infancy, and I think probably during the period is about, we all look at Bitcoin and then maybe somewhere around 2016, 17, Ethereum. How do you make that pivot from fintech into the current Web3 space then?
First, I was having the accelerator. So basically, I saw the first hands of the old accelerator startups back then. And they're not only fintech, but all kind of, digital service, digital economy solutions back then. I got my first sort of partial Bitcoin back into 2015 from my other partner called Joseph. And we were in sort of a seminar which they're discussing about Bitcoin and this kind of thing. I was saying, what? Bitcoin? Why is that? So I just downloaded an app and it just transferred me a partial of Bitcoin back then. That's how the journey got started. So I think the environment of a startup world is basically you can in touch with the most pioneer technology and also most pioneer people around the industry. So we started looking to a different service, a different solution around the industry, and that's how the things get started.
And I think given your journey, right, you came from Standard Chartered Bank, which is actually pretty well known in Singapore because it's owned by Temasek, which is a pretty well known sovereign wealth fund in the world. One thing I want to ask you, what are the interesting career lessons you can share with my audience about your journey?
Well, I believe some of the listeners are probably still relatively young generations. So I would invite people to actually, just like a start trial and error during your career path. So it's never a sort of a waste. Even as a job or the task you're taking on is something you're not passionate about, but you were definitely taking something out of from it. So trial and error, I think that's the way to basically to self-explore your true love it is.
That's an interesting lesson to be shared too. Which comes to my main subject of the day, right? Which is about AppWorks Ventures and investing in the Web3 ecosystem. To start, as I've interviewed Jamie earlier this year on AppWorks and the overall investment thesis of the firm and where it's going, I just would like you to, can you share a quick introduction to AppWorks for my audience?
So I think the core of AppWorks is basically surrounded by founders, especially startup founders. And I usually use an analogy like saying AppWorks Accelerator, the service is basically mostly like an EMBA for founders. So, the only difference probably is it's a free program. So, in EMBA, you're facing a lot of people from different industry, but they're trying to expand their network around the business world to get more insights from there. I think this is the same thing in AppWorks Accelerator. We're trying to gather different founders around different industry, and they're trying to use technology or internet service to make things better and solve certain problems. And technology or internet is just one of the techniques they're using, but there's definitely some shared common interests that they're having in the community. So that's a core. And beyond that, it's expanding to a different service that serve founders. So we figured that a lot of talent gap in between school and university versus the industry. So that's why we have an AppWorks School, which basically cultivate the young generation and to help a non-CS background graduates turning into a junior software engineer. And beyond that, we also have an AppWorks fund. So basically, it's a venture fund that helps some of founders to grow faster and bigger.
And I think today we are going to be really diving deep into Web3. I know Jamie kind of gave a little bit glimpse of where AppWorks is thinking about the Web3 space and the investments in that segment. I want to start off by maybe just tap into your brain, and we have discussed a little bit earlier on this. Can you define the market opportunity in Web3, or what we today call crypto blockchain, which I'm going to use it very interchangeably. And so for all the experts out there, please do not be angry about that. And also the key segments that actually interest you most in the Web3 space.
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably heard about the analogy that Web3, from Chris Dixon, that Web3 is the most different part is that you can own the stuff, whatever stuff you have. And I think I can elaborate a little bit on what is that owning means. These days, a lot of data or a lot of sort of journey you have on the internet is mostly owned by the big corporate like Facebook, like Google or Apple. And although you are the person who actually did these activities, you are actually not owning these data. And the difference from Web3 is that why is that important that you are owning this data? Whether you can use that data to do anything is one thing. Whether you own it is another thing. For example, you can think about if a day that your account has been hacked or stolen, and if it's a Facebook account and we presume there's some money in there, you probably definitely need to go through the Facebook company to see where the account flow goes and why did that happen. But these days in crypto, basically, there's a whole journey that you can track the whole hacking or stolen things. Whether you can protect that is one thing, but whether you are able to track on your willingness, I think that's another thing. So I think the most important thing is not about you're not only owning that, but it's also transparent, which you can track. So I think that's the main difference we're seeing in the Web3 versus Web2 world. The most interesting segment, so I think most of us will all agree that this adoption from the mass public is still early. So we are more interested in the service that can adopt next billion users into crypto or Web3 world.
I think when you talk about real digital ownership, it's also a concept that Yasil from Animoca Brands, who was on the show, also talked about in terms of owning that particular digital asset you have. And of course, you always hear the maxis, depending on which blockchain you want, they always say, not your keys, not your crypto, Yeah, you need to have a wallet on that. I want to sort of zoom in, and this is a question that I always ask every VC who comes on my show. Does a typical day look like for you as a VC looking into Web3 deals?
I would say my day is probably quite similar, but the difference is that we have accelerator. So I would basically separate that into two different categories. So I have more internal facing things. So internal is facing like accelerator startups. We will have alpha star. We will have different discussion around different topics. And also internal facing thing, like I will have discussion with my colleagues about the deals, about the strategy, and also different partnership. And outside first facing things, it's more like meeting the different partners, meeting different potential deal flow, and also meeting different industry players. So that's mostly basing my days like.
And it would be much more interesting for you in Web3, right? You also have to deal with wallets and everything else.
Yeah, that's a whole different thing. In the past, we were basically just dealing with banks, and it has like definitely a very holistic sort of procedure you just need to follow through. But these days, it's not like that. So you have to explore like different opportunities, and also probably some of the loophole that the service provider might have.
Yeah, I could think about those days when I started angel investing and trying to wire that 10K into the startup with my MetaMask wallet, and then wondering, did the cash get there? But it's interesting, right? The deal sourcing is different. The way we even have to work on deal flows is also different. I think like very similar to all the investments that we look at. What are the key traits you index in a founder or a startup team that you're likely to invest into?
I'm not sure if people heard about Jamie's episode before. I'm not sure whether he mentioned that there's a 3H. We are evaluating the deals. I think that also still apply to the Web3 deals as well. So the 3H stands for heads, hand, and heart. So heads means how are you able to adjust your strategy with the markets. Hand means your ability to execute on the ideas you want to. And heart is basically the motivation, the drivers behind why you're doing a startup. For me, I will personally think heart is probably the most important. I think the driver behind a person is always the difference from whether you can be a good founder or a great founder.
And if I reverse the question and then say, what would be the red flags you are looking for then?
I think it's the integrity and whether the people is genuine enough or not. Because I think some of the teams these days in Web3 is probably not seeing investors as a long-term partner, because some of the investors are more like a rug and pull. But I usually see the startups we work or invest with, no matter it's a token or equity side, we usually see it's a long-term partner. So basically, it's just like looking for a husband or wife in your marriage. So it's a long-term commitment. And if you cannot be transparent and genuine enough at first place, it's hardly to believe we have to work with this kind of attitude in the long run. So I personally would see that as a red flag.
Just curious question. Are we going to start doing security audits? I mean, there's a lot of cross-chain rich hacks these days, right? I mean, think about it from the integrity point of view. And of course, the contagions that swipe out the ones that have no ethics and etc. I think this is so part of that makes this space very, very difficult to grasp. Sometimes.
Yeah, so that's probably the DID will be more and more important.
Agree. I'm just going to put this question in a more thoughtful way. What are the interesting Web3 companies that you have invested in the space currently? And of course, I know there's no favorites, but I just want to get a sense of like what companies are they and what do they do that makes you interested in them?
I think I can bring two examples. One, we made the investment a couple of months ago. It's called Origami. And they're coming out from the Orange DAO, which is a YC DAO in the States. I think they have a quite deep insight into sort of a DAO operation itself. These days, a lot of, no matter you're gaming or, a DeFi companies, a lot of them have a DAO, but it's a relatively new concept. I think the background of the story is because they have operate Orange DAO, and the figure is really, really hard for a team to start from scratch and, build up the whole DAO operations and also engage, especially there's an engagement with different parties. So I think the approach is basically to build up a certain sort of SOP for different kinds of the DAO, no matter you're an investment DAO or you're a solution DAO or you're different kinds of DAO. So you will apply to different kind of SOP, and it will quite hand-holding you to onboarding the first few important steps to make this DAO gonna success in the long run. And I think that's something very important because some of the DAO tools only serving for payroll, only serving for treasury management. But we all know it's not only a certain function that is now DAO needed. It's more like a collaboration, also more about the consensus and also the management as well. So I think a hand-holding of that is actually quite important. The other startup we invested recently is called Tea House, and I think that's an interesting startup as well. So they're actually from Taiwan, and they have helped build up a different, very well-known NFT project in the region in the past few 12 to 18 months. And however, their main core is actually the asset management tool, because while they're helping a lot of NFT teams to build up their NFT projects, they figure a lot of them are actually artist background, photographer backgrounds. They are Web3 enthusiasts, but they are not good at management the treasury. So they're basically helping them build up the technology side of the NFT and also help the team to manage a certain portion of the ETH they're getting out of the NFT drops. I think that's important because from the lesson we had in 2017 and 2018 ICO, during the ICO boom, we actually saw a lot of startups are getting a lot of different tokens or ETH on hands. But because they didn't manage that well, so that turns out after the bear market comes, the startup just cannot hold it any longer. So I think it's actually important to make sure the treasury has well managed in a certain way. So I think that's an interesting approach.
Interesting you mentioned Origami and Tea House and how they have started with a certain concept and then eventually ending up building tools. I kind of term it Web3 SaaS, and I also have invested in the space as well. And I'm also noticing some of the companies within my portfolio now are thinking the same thing, where they started to get requests from the same type of companies that they are in the same category on certain things. They now ended up building tools for
those people.
Companies. Yes. So it is also part and parcel of it, right? Because it seems that the shovels for the people to digging like in gold in San Francisco in the 1800s is kind of seems to be applicable in the same space as well. I think if we take it and just take from the Web3 SaaS and then we just open it up a little bit further, what are the more exciting trends that you are seeing in the Web3 space? I mean, there's DeFi, there is GameFi, now there's SocialFi, even NFTs as well. Which areas are sort of making you most excited, or maybe something I haven't seen yet, or you and I haven't seen it?
I'm actually not a huge believer on the fi itself, no matter it's a trade fi or whatever fi or DeFi or GameFi. I think the fi itself is limited the audience you can have. That means it's a strong elements for the token or NFT itself. That's trading is important elements. So that means generating revenue or generating gains. All of it is kind of important portion within the white paper itself. I actually think going forward, these will be downsizing a bit about or less emphasize on the buy itself, but more emphasize on the exactly use of the token or itself. So I would believe on the entertaining side or the gaming side, because I think the only thing people need to know is something recorded on chain, but it not necessarily need to be traded. So I think it's a different from a Web2 and Web3 game is that NFT you hold is really owned by you, but it doesn't mean that you need to trade it. So for example, if you're playing a game in the past, you're not playing a game because it's tradable. You're not playing a game because it's fun. You're enjoying that instead of you're getting money out of it. So I would think still the mass adoption of the Web3 will still comes from entertainment and the gaming side.
I actually have a little bit different opinion on this. I think that one of the key features of Web3 is that once you decide that you want to launch a token or have a specific asset, you inevitably create a capital market that's embedded under whichever protocol you want to do. And I think that's where the FI comes from, right? In terms of the how people perceive the market. But I think the trading part of it is actually, to me, is like Web2 companies waiting for a hell long time to decide to go public and then get subjected to the public investors. And in Web3, it's the other way around. You start going token and then you get your public markets totally hammer you on the trading market every day. So it's just a varying degrees of that. I don't know whether is that something you think about from time to time?
I think it's definitely need a balance in between. I'm actually not a believer of the Web2 turning Web3 thing. So these days, a lot of companies basically turning a non-profitable Web2 companies and adding a token elements into that and turning into a Web3 companies, and think issuing a token can split the whole picture differently. I'm not a believer of that. The reason is that the user coming on board with a different purpose. These people from the Web2, they don't care about whether they have token. They don't care about whether they're owning the assets. And if you're adding the token, making it tradable, I think the target audience is different. So whether they are tradable is one thing, but whether the whole token holders believe in Web3, whether they actually know they're having these assets, another thing.
Which I wholeheartedly agree with you, because I have this debate even in a couple of the networks I'm involved in, whether it's angel networks where they have a very strong Web2 investment angle. And once it goes into Web3, they try to play the Web2 argument. And I always try to tell them there's no network effects in Web3 because adding one node doesn't increase the network effect. And it takes them quite a long time to actually get to that. But there's another area that I thought would be very interesting to get a point of view from you. Are we moving towards a multi-chain world with different specializations? Or maybe it's a world of just only that few dominant key blockchains that lead the way? I mean, we know the Bitcoin is one, Ethereum is definitely the other one, and maybe nearby is Solana, and then you take your Avalanche, Near, and everyone else on the list. But do you see which part of the Web3 world do you think we are going in terms of the chain, the different chains at the moment?
I would actually go more like a multi-chain world. I think so. If you asked me the question like 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, I would probably not be certain, but these days I would quite positive on that, because we've seen Solana grow from nothing to nowadays a quite successful L1 chain. Even now, a lot of people are choosing Solana. There's no sort of innovation application on Solana. There's a lot of hacks, and so basically every developers are just copying the application from Ethereum and just make the same one on Solana and do that again. But if you're seeing NFT sales on Solana these days, so back then, DeFi was more popular. And after that, Solana figured out they have to create more applications on NFT related things. So they're starting to cultivate these kind of application from different developers. And these days, you can pretty much see the market has been established, and sometimes it actually exceeds on the sales Ethereum as well. So that means even you're latecomers, that means as long as you have a resource, as long as you have developers, the market can still be established.
And then that comes to my next question, right? How do you evaluate the opportunities in different chains, right? Like, for example, I can think of a play-to-earn game, and then I go into the market, and then every chain has its own funding mechanisms. I can decide maybe I should build on Solana, maybe another company with the same idea could develop on Ethereum or even Binance Smart Chain as well, or even, the other chains out there. I mean, Polygon, for example, is pretty popular with gaming. How do you evaluate the opportunities of companies operating in these different chains, which you could see 4 different companies from 4 different chains?
Exactly. I think there's one element and it's easier to see during the bear market, and which we like it more, because the one thing is engagement and also retention. So we pretty much can agree in the past 12 to 18 months, when the market is good, people are spending a lot and you're getting user acquisitions, and it's actually not too hard to get either money or users on board. But I think when the market is good, we put too much emphasis on that. So you get the user acquisition but after you acquire the users, there's less attention on the user retention and user engagement. And that's actually very crucial to an application or a service, whether it works in the long run or it's just working during the bull market. So these days, it's actually a very good time to observe whether you are able to have user engagement, whether your user are real user or just embedded metrics. I think that's something I want to tell the difference.
And I think what you're alluding to is that the bear market helps you to take out all the noise from the market, and then just basically see who is left standing there, and then cultivate those that are actually working. But maybe they're all in different chains. But would you say, as a VC, say this game is very successful, say in Ethereum, would you ask the entrepreneur, maybe you can think about, let's try Avalanche, and let's try maybe the new Aptos chain from those guys from Facebook who starting another L1 chain coming out, or even in the L2 Ethereum chain, like say an Optimism or Arbitrum as well?
I wouldn't suggest they're doing sort of 100% the same business model. So take StepN, for example, right? So people are seeing the success of StepN in a certain time frame and starting to copy that into different chain or different exercise, jumping ropes or different kind of exercise. But at the end of the day, StepN is also facing the same problem, whether they are able to get more customer engaged, and eventually there's a balance between the StepN tokens and different 2 tokens around. So how to keep the engagement and retention sustained, that's one thing. So I think that's the same thing to even latecomers players. No matter which chain they are copying into, or no matter which kind of exercise they're replicate into, I think eventually they are facing the same problem, which I don't think StepN solve them all, which I think the latecomers will have come up with different solutions.
And it's actually interesting, right? Because now you can have the same thing like, have DeFi on Ethereum, DeFi on Solana. One interesting thing is, how would the landscape play out in Web3? So in terms of business models, we've seen play to earn. We are seeing customer acquisition strategies like memes, airdrops. Are we going to see more shifts in how these mechanisms are and will change in the next wave?
Yeah, for example, memes or airdrops. I think that's a great tactics, because, in Web2, you can put buy Facebook ads with taggings, the people who love sports, who love exercise, you can place a different ask to them. I think that's pretty much the same thing in Web3's airdrops. So a lot of people airdrop NFT to some of the special NFT holders because you own this kind of money, so you probably own like these NFT as well. I think that's a great tactic. It's pretty much like mimicking your TA shape out of it. But eventually will still, as I mentioned, eventually after you acquire this user, after you airdrop this user, you don't want it just be the people who hold your NFT or hold your tokens. That's definitely something you want these people to do after they have a token, no matter it's trade, no matter this generative art, you are coming out of from a different kind of a type of NFT or they were engagement in a community. That's something people should observe more and put more efforts on instead of, tactic itself.
I think in terms of protocol wise, right? If you look at, say, how ENS did their airdrop and maybe even like Optimism and Arbitrum, because they're now in the second wave and they learn a lot of lessons from the first wave from the DeFi Summer in 2020. You find that these days, they don't just want you to hold the token, have the wallet, or do one transaction on the chain. They want you to do at least like 4 or 5 things on the chain to get very used to using the chain before they could even want to airdrop anything to you.
Right. Yeah. So after the airdrop, there's a few steps. Involvement is that there's few more steps you need to complete, share on your traders and things like that. But I think that's, still not good enough, right? People can after doing that, they got a token, they're still doing nothing, right? They're still not trading them. So eventually people are going to polish that process and to see what's the best way to get the good users.
Yeah. And that comes to the other more interesting part about funding companies. I have done definitely all 3. Given now we are in a down market, it's also very interesting as well. How do you now think about funding companies? Is it equities, tokens, or a mix of both? Word on the street I hear from Web3 companies is that everybody don't want tokens anymore and they only want equity. But obviously, I don't know your position, so I just want to get a sense, where are you thinking about?
Well, I think because it's bear market now, so people are saying that equity is definitely better than tokens. But I would say I was relatively neutral to that. I think the most important thing is you're balancing out the interest between the different parties. From our past experience, the most dangerous thing is that there's imbalance between token holder versus the team versus the equity holders. And it's not something you want to deal with in the long run. So the revenue definitely goes to either equity, or tokens. It will definitely go to somewhere, and the revenue definitely go to somewhere. So if you are having 2 different vehicles on the same time, you need to make sure that all the parties' interests are aligned. Otherwise, it's better to only choose one instead of manage 2.
Yeah, I find the mix of tokens and equities makes it very confusing, and you need to put a token warrants on top of your safe agreement, right? I mean, I get entrepreneurs asking me sometimes like, but which one should we take? And then we are like, well, what suits you, right? What suits the company moving forward? Because you take tokens, you get into governance issues. And this is where I think you have the origami. So I think this is pretty interesting because if you follow the news, you've seen what Hatsu and the people in Flashbots are doing to all the different governance from Lido, Uniswap, and throwing all kinds of proposals to test the market. This is where tokens does have some complexity, and which I think we haven't really seen before. Does the DAO governance issues that we observed recently is going to make it difficult for investors to put money in? Because if you don't have a significant vote and the community decided to go something that's totally against the interests of the investors, and this is not uncommon, right? But it also makes it very difficult. Once you lay down the law, it's going to be very hard to change it.
Yeah.
And this is where DAOs, I think people don't see the inflexibility within DAOs and they just like, oh, let's just do tokens, let's just do.
I totally agree with that. I think there's definitely a lot of complexity between tokens and equities, or even just token itself. Because for token holders, you probably can imagine it's not only teams, not only early users. Your investors probably hold a big chunk of portion of your tokens. So, it's hardly to say if there's necessary vote on the government's issues, and if the investors holding good enough, of the portions for real investors who are warm proposal. But I think the whole DAO, sort of the term or how to operate, is basically is a social experiment, I would say. So I think one of them very interesting DAO I'm observing now is, I'm not sure whether you heard about noun projects. So basically people are getting a different noun or are purchasing a noun every day and putting it into a DAO. And to be honest, there's no specific items that how to place a treasury and how to use that. But so it's totally a social experiment. You're seeing how these people, if they get a foot into this treasury pool, and how does that gonna evolve into? I think that's an interesting thing people are seeing these days.
It's interesting. So I actually read a book on the history of constitutions, which in human history, that means how the American Constitution came about, or the Haitian Constitution, etc. And the reason why I actually went and read a book on that was because I think what a lot of people think, yes, we come into this new thing, we create DAOs and then we create governance. We think that these are the minimum rules. Actually, the minimum rules is kind of a constitution, right, and they're subject to amendments, right? And the people do not appreciate that the nuances where you start to realize this rule that you originally have can be broken because people can abuse or run around it. And then you realize, oh, shucks, this rule may not be right now. Maybe we need to change. And then to force an amendment is extremely difficult because you need to take a lot of governance road, which I think what Hasu managed to expose people in doing by throwing all these governance rules. I mean, even if the same thing, right? Coinbase, which is an investor to USDC, can suddenly go to using their governance token and say, hey, you know what? Not to circle, but actually to make it down and say, you know what? I'll give you this amount of yield for your part of that treasury, and throw it as the governance proposal. And everybody was like,
hijacking.
It's a hijacking mechanism, right? So it's that thing, that evolving complexity to, like what you said, a social experiments, right?
Yeah. I think it's basically just like how democracy was formed in the past hundreds of years, right? Like any hacks, I think that's definitely has already happened before. In the past, it's more like a country level, and now it's more like a project or company level.
Okay, I don't want to put you in a spot. So given that now we're in the midst of what I call evolving bear market, depending on what is happening with the Fed and interest rates, if you were to write the memo to the crypto or Web3 startups on how to navigate through those tough times, because you've seen the Sequoia memo, you see the Y Combinator memo, how would you write your memo then? What is the AppWorks Web3 memo that you will write?
I think the bear markets these days, it's really hard for the startups getting new users and new money these days. But I think the most different part during this bear market versus like 3 years ago is that there's actually a lot of users in the ecosystem, a lot of money in this ecosystem now. So instead of seeing how we can acquire new user and trying to put a lot of ads to put people on board without a hype, I think it's probably a good time to deep dive into the current user, what they are looking for. So these users, if they're holding tokens, there's definitely something they want to do, no matter they want to get a, relatively stable interest, or they're just, want to hold it, or they want to fractional owning some of the NIT or something like that. So you can deep dive into the current users and to segment that into a different type of users they can be. People are saying during the bear market, you should build, and of course you should build, but you should build on something, right? If you should build on people's needs, I think that's the most important thing. So face the reality that by the end of the day, you need user retention. You need user to engage with your service. So I think this is a good time to deal with that.
I was a crypto trader in the ICO boom then. And then what I realized is that by the time everything collapses, I think Bitcoin was about 85 to 86% drop against all-time high. And then Ethereum, I think, is 94%. And then still, when it comes back up, I think, as you said, the retaining users, people who had tokens, then you see the likes of MetaMask, you see the likes of Uniswap, and then you see the likes of Aave Compound, and you see the NFTs. I think those things have come out. I think the good news for this time around, I think everything is now within 70 to 80%, depending on the price of the day. But there is still a minimum base of users that you are alluding to that you can still tap on to basically expand that current market.
Yeah, totally. So you and I definitely own tokens, own NFT these days, right? Even in a bear market, and the people surrounded by us, it's also owning NFT and tokens. We're probably not trade as much as before, but we definitely want to put use of that tokens, right? So I think that's important to see what the person's risk appetite, not only risk appetite, but also the long-term plan of their tokens. So I think that's something you can start to explore.
Yeah. And also the L2 chains as well. I've been spending a lot more time on the L2 chains, just thinking about what to do. And I think they gave me a better sense of where DeFi is going. It's actually getting more and more complex.
It is. It's actually, yeah. But I think going forward, so we usually argue about that. It's whether the people, for example, like 5 years from now, the new crypto user, do they really know which kind of L1 they're at? Do they know which kind of L2 they're at? Or they just know there's a certain wallets that are holding that? So I think going forward, these sort of a technology, L1, L2 side, will be eventually not be known by the users.
No, I agree with you. And there's a company I'm actually watching out for, but I just realized there's another 4 or 5 companies. It's called Layer Zero.
Oh yeah,
where they're trying to be like the messaging layer to basically allow the protocols to interact rather than trying to have these cross-chain bridges to hold the cash and then get hacked. Because they're both unstable. This like wormhole, right? It's unstable, right? So yeah, the physics analogy just works nicely for Web3.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I think given that where things are going, I think it's actually more interesting to see if we just have like one chain and it can automatically tell you which chain you're on instead of you and I on MetaMask. I don't know how many chains you have solved daily. Yeah, right. You have to go to different chains, and then Binance has its own chain, and then somebody wants to send me something on Binance. Oh shucks, I need to change to the Binance chain. Oh yeah, I can see it now.
The user experience, I think most of us can agree that user experience is not ideal at all at this moment.
I think that's going to be the Web3 user experience.
Yeah, totally.
Not the Web2 user experience bring into Web3.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, last question for you. What does great look like for you for AppWorks in the Web3 space?
These days, going forward, I think because we all say, Web3 is more like transparency and open world. I think that you will see that more and more in AppWorks as well. As the topic we just discussed, like equity token, all this kind of stuff. So we did have a lot of experience, since 2016, 17, and now how these case study be evolved, and how do we see in the long run, how does that affect to the founder, to the teams, and also the user or equity holders? I think I would say open knowledge will be something we're heading to from the VC side, because in the past, the VC side is sort of the secret to most of the players around the region, around the industry. But I think from our side, I think these can be opened up and be open to the industry players going forward. It's not only so basically knowledge you are getting as an investor. That's something where you can see more and more from AppWorks.
And according to the people who actually round up all the VCs in Web3 that raise funding, the total amount of dry powder left is 41 billion. So there's still a lot of money out there.
Yeah. I think, Star don't actually need to worry about that.
Yeah, I think so too. As long as the idea is good. Jessica, many thanks for coming on the show. In closing, 2 quick questions. First one, any recommendations that have inspired you recently?
I just read a book. I already published a couple years ago, but it's called Finite and Infinite Game. I'm not sure other people read it or not,
yes.
But yeah, it's a very interesting concept. Like it's about for example, finite game. You can think about like a basketball game, or even the company. Your certain goal you reach is sort of a finite game, and infinite game is like life is infinite, and relations you have with other people are very infinite. So I was inspired at some of the mistakes that people are having, or even myself are making these days, is that usually putting an infinite game into a finite game. So you're self-limit yourself and self-constrain yourself. So, and I think it helps you to identify what's the priority and objective you want to reach in every conversation or in every choice that you are making. So I think that's quite inspirational.
I would just add a recommendation because I mentioned that book that I've read. It's called The Gun, the Ship, and the Pen by Linda Cotley. It's about history of constitutions, and I really urge people who are thinking about DAOs, go read it. Yeah, because you have to understand that. Last question, how do my audience find you?
From LinkedIn, I think it's probably the easiest way, no matter if you're from Web 2 or Web 3. You can just search Jessica Liu, AppWorks, you can pretty much get it.
Definitely can find this podcast in every platform out there, and you can definitely tweet to us at Analyse Asia, ANALYSE Asia. And of course, give us a 5-star rating in iTunes so that we get a little bit easier to discover. Jessica, many thanks. Definitely get you back and have a longer chat next time around.
Totally. Okay. Thank you so much for having me.